unknowable.
I looked at it more carefully and then saw in its leaves it does something incredible. That the lower leaves are long-stalked and kidney-shaped, and they form a little rosette. There are only 3 of them still alive. There were more earlier on. Then a little ways up the main stem, you have the next leaf, which also has a long stalk, but is already in its blade.
Craig Holdridge has also had a long interest in Steiner, and through Steiner into the work of Goethe. In upstate New York, he has founded the Nature Institute, where observation, the kind of meditative observation that Steiner practiced over many years, is explored.
We founded the Nature Institute with the intention of having a place that can cultivate a particular way of knowing that can bring us back more in relationship with nature and the things themselves. And now that sounds, very harmless and simple and maybe not even that important, but if you think about how strongly our culture and our minds are captivated with certain kind of abstract ideas, and we notice that people come to us with many, many abstractions in their minds about what hormones do, about what the brain does, about how natural selection has made us this way or that way. And we have all these explanations of the world, but do we see the world? Do we experience the world anymore? And of course, with our technologically dominated culture, this becomes more and more an issue. Goethe said something like, if we want to gain a living understanding of nature, we must make ourselves as mobile and flexible as nature herself. So science as transformation of the human being to understand the living character of the world. That's the mission of the Nature Institute. When Steiner came across Goethe's work when he was still a student at the university in Vienna, what he found in Goethe, what stimulated him in Goethe, was that here was a man who really immersed himself in the phenomenal world, didn't have lots of abstract concepts, and thereby opened himself to seeing relationships that spoke of more than the mere physical. It is just unfortunate today that we are so much in a dualistic culture, matter and mind, soul, or body and spirit, if we even think about the one half, right? But if we do think about the spiritual or the soul or whatever, then it's always in contrast to the body or this, but to see a unified world. And that was really Steiner in his epistemology based on Goethe was all about the one world that we live in. It is one world, and we are part of one world. And there aren't 2 or 3 or 50. There might be nuances and different levels, or whatever you want to call them, different aspects that one can gain access to, but it is one manifoldly differentiated world. In this approach to understanding the world, you really do have to slow down. I mean, and that part of our challenge today is our rushed world, right? We rush from one thing to the next, and thereby we can't really take anything in and meet it in any depth. And so just to sit down and perceive and take the time to look at a plant or look at one leaf of one plant for 5 minutes, takes a lot today. And to take it in and say, what do you have to show me? And then the work continues. But you've slowed down and you've gone out and taken the time to take in something that the world has to offer you. And that gives it a moment of quiet and a moment where you can really enter into a conversation with the world. So I, sometimes thought about, this methodology or this aspect of the methodology, that it would be interesting to speak of, like one speaks of slow food today and slow money, to speak of slow science. We need to slow down so that we can really dwell in the things as a basis of a more as the basis of a deeper understanding of the world.
Towards each other too, then.
Yes. I mean, in all respects. I speak mainly about, when I'm speaking about nature, I'm also speaking about my fellow human beings, right? In all our relationships, this, taking the time.
One set of relationships that Steiner had while still studying in Vienna, and which was to have far-reaching consequences, took place in this building, the home of the Specht family. Steiner tutored the 4 boys during his last 6 years in Vienna, while at the same time studying and writing on Goethe. Of particular concern to his parents was Otto, 10 years old when Steiner first met him, and considered by everyone as both physically and mentally abnormal and therefore uneducable. With Steiner's help, Otto's condition gradually improved, and eventually he became a doctor. There is now a whole movement for therapeutic education, with schools and villages, not only here on the banks of the Severn Estuary in England, but all over the world. A movement inspired by the lecture Steiner gave in 1924, drawing on his experience with Otto, as well as on his own insights into the make-up of the human being and the abnormalities that can occur. The Grange is a Camp Hill community for adults with learning difficulties, part of a network of Camp Hill schools and villages throughout the world. Over the years, I've made a number of films about Camp Hill, and I've always been deeply touched by the atmosphere of warmth, tolerance and wisdom.
Some of the buses are taken off. Then how are we going to get there? Shanks's pony, or even a minibus. That's all I have to say.
John, do you work here every day then?
I work in the garden. I work in the garden.
Do you?
Yeah, I work in the pottery as well.
Oh, so you've got a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
Which one do you like best?
Pottery.
Pottery.
Yeah.
You meant to say the bakery.
Yes, I'm the bakery.
That's better.
Sorry. Sorry, Greg.
You work in the pottery all the time? Every day?
Yeah, I work every day, every morning.
Ah, yeah. What do you do in the afternoon?
Afternoon, I'm outside on the land on the estate.
Oh, that's nice. Even when it's raining?
Yeah.
It's nice to have 2 jobs then, is it?
Yes, it is, yes.
Take another one of those. Makes life easier.
Workshops like this one are not seen as simply providing occupational therapy, but as an opportunity for the residents to produce goods that are valued and of use, as they themselves are valued. It's finished.
Yep. The way I have to do is to put this plate into the woman cupboard over there. I'll show you.
I've been in camp at the age of 5.
So you've been in Camp Hill since you were 5 years old. How old are you now?
23.
23. Yeah.
I am the youngest in my family.
You're the youngest. Huh?
Yeah, I have a big sister as well.
Big sister.
Yeah, 2 big sisters.
Yeah. Do you go home sometimes?
Yeah, I see my dad, but my parents are not together.
Aren't they?
Yeah, it's difficult, but I could get on well with my family.
Yeah.
Even we have ups and downs, I just get along with them.
I think lots of families have ups and downs. Don't they?
Yeah.
And you like it here?
Yes.
This is like your family in a way, isn't it?
Judy and Nina, my family.
Yes. That's nice. Well, you're doing a wonderful job.
Yes.
That's the microphone.
Now I'll show you the finished plates.
Can you? So that's the finished plate, yeah.
Yes, it is, yes.
Yeah. Must be very satisfying to do it.
Yes, it
You
is.
enjoy it, yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I love working in pottery.
Yeah. Camp Hill was founded by Karl Koenig in 1939, along with a group of fellow refugees from Nazi-occupied Austria. Their angel led them to Scotland, where, inspired by the work of Rudolf Steiner, they created a worldwide movement for the care of children and adults who were, in the language of the time, in need of special care.
I think you might need to spray between the saw. You might need to spray between the saw.
I'll get you the spray.
Hang up another swallow, are you?
Yes. This is my washing line. Michael calls it my washing line. They all made a joke out of it, but I don't mind.
You know a bit about Steiner?
Just a little bit. Comes from Vienna, doesn't he?
Well, in Austria, yes.
Austria.
Yes.
And he started a lot of Camp Hills.
Well, he inspired the
He
whole
inspired.
campus. Yes.
Inspired, that's the word I want.
Yes, yeah.
And also Karl Koenig with his friend, well, not his friend, but one of the people.
Yeah. Koenig was interested in Steiner's ideas,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
And he wanted to follow the impulse,
That's right.
or at least try.
He's trying, yes.
Giving and receiving. Giving and receiving. And a big rainbow. And way back to ourselves. To see the deep blue sea.
What Judy Bailey is trying to do, through a therapy that Steiner developed called eurythmy, is to heal through movement, often very simple movements. And how is that helping, Judy? Can you say?
Well, the breathing is where everything starts with the human being, isn't it? We're too excited or we're too sad. Everything is to do with breathing. Breathing out, breathing in. You know that laughing is all breathing out. Crying is all breathing in. Oh, isn't it? So start always with the middle, with the breathing. In water and out. In the water and out of the water. So the air coming in and the air coming out influences our well-being. So if you have too much tension, you're breathing very shallow breath and very tight, and you're making yourself ill. Or if you're too loose, your members are too loose, then you are also getting ill. So the breathing is very central for well-being. So we do a lot with breathing, but we don't talk about breathing because we do it through the movement, yeah? So we might even do this exercise now, walking, which we do sometimes, don't we? So a step down, step up, step to the right, step to the left. We'll go back in a minute. Step to the right, up, down, and rest.
Is it difficult to do, Tilly?
It's a bit embarrassing,
A bit embarrassing, yes.
but you can practice.
Yeah. But it makes you feel better.
Yeah.
Yes.
The more you are in tune with the rhythms, less you're bound to the forces of the earth that are pulling you into heaviness. Without the heaviness, we wouldn't be on the earth. We would be floating, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
But the earth is pulling us, but we don't want to be a machine. So if we would just be bound to earth,
Yeah.
yes, so to overcome that we are doing rhythms, to overcome that heaviness, we do rhythms.
Yeah.
And the rhythms connect us to the rhythms of the universe. And people like Jade are very perceptive. They take in quite the whole thing. That's why it's so wonderful, because they're not bound to the earth like some of us. That's how I see it anyway.
Yeah. So she teaches you.
She teaches me.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the truth of the matter. Yes.
And Judy teaches you. Yeah.
It's a mutual fun. Yeah?
Judy used the two words innocence and vulnerability as characterizing a condition that can have this healing role in the world.
Being completely vulnerable, that calls out the best qualities around you, and also the worst. But it has a healing influence. And anybody you will ask here that comes in here and meets people here feels they have been healed by meeting people like Jade.
Later, Judy told me about the importance she attaches to working with prayer and meditation along the lines that Steiner suggested.
I definitely know that there is something spiritual in me, and that if I draw on it, I can be more helpful to the residents in my house. The spirituality that I'm active with, if I'm practicing meditation or I'm thinking about spiritual thoughts, the people around me feel it immediately and need it for themselves. They can't create it by themselves. Some even learn to create it, but mainly that's my main tool to be a house coordinator, is my spiritual activity. All the rest, I mean, knowing how to cook is very good, but the ability to live on a different sphere than the physicality is very important. They also know that even if they fail, they have something in them that is eternal and very complete, that I recognize, and it's very important for them.
What do you understand by the word spirituality then?
The part of you that wants everything to be good and beautiful and true is what I understand. That all of us have that core, that all of us actually have, and desperately try to see it in others and desperately want others to recognize in ourselves. Yeah. Very simple, it's very down to earth, it's not up in the air. Yeah. And I know that I meet an awful lot of people who are active in that way in the world.
Everyone at the Grange lives in family-sized households, and the land is worked biodynamically. In charge of the gardens is Tony Carlton.
You weed and ridge at the same time. All right. But only part ridge, not fully ridge. Okay. Okay? So it's just a bit, because each time that you do it, it sort of accumulates. That way we beat the weed much better.
Tony compared Ian's vortexing of the preparation to breathing. Judy and Jade breathe, the cows breathe, the earth breathes, and so too, through stirring rhythmically, does this substance. Tony Carlton's armillary sphere is his equivalent of those planets on sticks laid out on an Indian farm.
Shortest daylight hours.
A clear, if squeaky way to observe how the sun moves throughout the year in relation to the 12 signs of the zodiac.
This sun line, as it goes through each constellation, has a different quality. So where the sun is at any particular time through the year, let's go to Easter, where we've already gone from Capricorn, Aquarius, and we've come to the fishes, we've come to Pisces. If we can imagine that that accumulation of energy is happening from Christmas time to Easter, we start entering spring. Now, in the conventional farming, you will find that all the farmers will actually sow their maize or their silage and this, that and the other when the sun is in Aries. Now they don't know it's in Aries, but Aries is a warmth sign, and it's an accumulation of energy that has made itself available from inside the earth, increased by the added daylight hours, and Aries brings warmth, which is when the farmers sow their maize.
Tony, when you say Taurus is an earth sign, I mean, what do you actually mean by that?
Well, you've got four main qualities: earth, light, water, and warmth. They're the four energies that you're working from. So most people who have a birthday, I don't know many people who haven't got some sort of birthday, that they will say, oh, I'm an earth sign. Yeah? In the plant world, that earth sign also means root. So your root vegetables. Yeah? With a water sign, you mean your leaf vegetables. With an air sign, it's normally your flowering impulse. And then with a warmth sign, you have your fruit. Yeah? So the four earth, water, fire, and air are broken down to root, leaf, flower, and fruit. So I need to remember what a plant is. So a lettuce is very happy with Pisces, but a bean is not, because a bean would be much happier with Aries, because if I sow it in Pisces, it's just going to sit there and wait and wait, and then once it goes to Aries, you realize that actually it will start doing something.
While Tony sprayed his newly stirred magic on the garden, I asked one of his apprentices what he made of all this and what he understood by our title, The Challenge of Rudolf Steiner.
One thing that is very much how people do things today is that, like, people don't really want to spend time with something unless they already know that it's right. Like, I think there's something in The Lord of the Rings where he describes hobbits, and he says hobbits only have books that tell you about things they already know. That's very much true about, I think that's very much true about the way people today relate to truth. Like, they don't, like, I don't know, left punky people, they read like the books written by left punky people because they know there's only things in them that they anyway agree on. And I think when you try to read Rudolf Steiner, usually what I find you will find that you need to open yourself to something that you do not yet know, or like you need to make an effort without knowing for sure. Like, it takes trust. I think that's the challenge.
Rudolf Steiner's own next challenge was the editing of Goethe's scientific papers, as well as writing his key book, The Philosophy of Freedom. In 1891, at the age of 30, he was awarded a doctorate of philosophy from the University of Rostock. A year earlier, he'd moved to Weimar. It was to be a lonely 7 years, working within the formality of the Goethe-Schiller archives and with no one with whom he could discuss his increasingly rich inner life of spiritual experiences. Meanwhile, his philosophical writings and insights remained largely unrecognized.
I discovered Steiner when I was in my early 20s, and I was at Oxford, at the university, in a highly intellectualized environment, which I hated, and
Studying
philosophy, well, PPE, which includes philosophy. Philosophy was the thing that I was really interested in, keen on, and it was just agony for me. I hated it. It was Bertrand Russell and David Hume and every manner of reductionist thinker that you could imagine. And there was no real philosophy. And then I came across Steiner's work, and it was a godsend to me, because there was someone talking about thinking, but in a completely different way from the abstract, intellectualized thinking that's practiced in the universities. So for me, it was like, here is a new direction that I can go in. And the atmosphere in the 70s, the early 70s, when I was at university and struggling to find my way, was actually very anti-intellectual amongst those people who were seeking a spiritual path. So I was caught, in a way, between the arid intellectualism of Oxford and this rejection of intellectualism altogether in order to find a spiritual way. And Steiner was very significant for me at that moment in time because he presented this alternative view of what thinking could be. So,
can you describe what that view is then? I mean, what was this alternative?
Well, one of Steiner's key books is The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity, or The Philosophy of Freedom, has those two different titles. And in that book he describes how thinking as an activity can be intensified so that it becomes a kind of dialogue with the world of spirit. And that seemed to me to be a path that I could follow.
But when you say world of spirit, I mean, you know, that can sound pretty weird to some people. Are you talking about talking to spiritual beings, or what do you mean by the world of spirit?
Well, yes, I do. It may well sound weird, but I think that's the reality of it, yes. But of course, one's actually in a kind of inner dialogue with a world of thoughts, but the question is, what is the source of our thinking? Where do our thoughts come from? That's a living question, which I think anyone who's engaged with that question of what thinking really is obliged to ask.
I mean, most people would probably say that our thoughts come from our brain.
Most people probably would say that, yes. Well, I don't think that's actually correct. And even to the extent, of course, thinking is dependent on our having a brains. If you cut my head off, I wouldn't be able to think. But it doesn't mean that the source of thinking is material.
How long must I be silent was the question that Rudolf Steiner was asking himself as he reached the age of 40, unable still to share his experiences of what he called die geistige Welt, the spiritual world. In 1897 he moved to Berlin, initially to edit an avant-garde literary and theatrical magazine. But it wasn't only to intellectuals and artists that he was drawn. As a result, he was asked to give courses in history at a workers' educational institute, a post he held for 7 years. But among the citizens of Berlin, as elsewhere in Europe and beyond, were an increasing number of people interested in spiritual teachings, in the case of the Theosophists, in a wisdom with its roots in the East. Here at last was an audience eager to listen to someone not just speaking out of the past, but out of his own inner vision. By 1907, Steiner had a considerable following, but still largely members of the Theosophical Society, and many wanting a guru figure. It was a role that he tried to resist for the rest of his life. Eventually, Steiner parted ways with the Theosophists and their leader, Anni Besant, in part prompted by their conviction that the young Indian boy, Krishnamurti, was a reincarnation of Christ, an identity that Krishnamurti himself later rejected. Steiner chose the name anthroposophy, meaning the wisdom that lives as potential in the human being, as the name for his breakaway movement. In the following years, he travelled all over Europe, not only lecturing and writing on esoteric subjects such as karma and reincarnation and cosmic evolution, but also planting seeds, practical indications for renewal in all areas of human life, including the arts. In 1912, together with his second wife, Marie von Sievers, and in connection with the mystery plays he was writing, Steiner brought into being a new art of movement that he called eurythmy, both as a therapy and as an art form.
Sonne, du strahlend tragende, deines Lichtes Stoffgewalt, zaubert Leben aus der Erde, unermesslich reichen Tiefen.
Bravo! Diese haben wir nicht den rechten Fuß gehabt. Ja.
We are working with speech and we are working with music, but in such a way that we try to be music and be speech. Be music is more understandable because you have ballet, they work with music, but they don't really go into the laws, if you can say that, of the music, the different elements of the music. But in tone eurythmy, you go into all the elements of music and you become them.
Ja, ganz richtig. Genau.
Rudolf Steiner calls it visible song. So that what is singing, what you hear in the music, that is what we are trying to express. And with speech, the same thing.
Die Weltenkräfte, sie verführen dich.
So the movements are very precise. You're not ad-libbing them.
No, not at all. They are really born out of the elements of music.
Yeah. And speech.
And speech too. You have the vowels, you have the consonants. Yeah. What we usually use when we speak, and we don't think about it, that it's possible also to express through movements this speech.
Herz, du Seelentragendes, deines Lichtes Geistgewalt.
Nur hier haben wir das Gleiche wie vorher, Seelentragende, nicht tragende.
Margareta Solstad leads the Eurythmy Ensemble based at the Goetheanum in Switzerland, the centre of the now worldwide Anthroposophical Society. Eurythmy may not on its own save the world, and the shape of the Goetheanum may not be to everyone's taste. They are, however, attempts by Steiner to waken people's awareness to what is seemingly hidden behind the world of appearances. Eurythmy explores this other dimension in both music and speech. And for Steiner, it was not a case of spirit or matter, heaven or earth, but rather spirit and matter. There is only one world, but it is infinitely more complex and many-layered than a purely materialistic mindset is willing to acknowledge. Over many years, through a combination of diligent meditation and an open heart, Steiner developed the natural clairvoyance he was born with into a faculty that made possible what he called spiritual science, a way of seeing, open to us all, that goes beyond our sense impressions and a narrowly focused intellect. To help awaken the spiritual in the human being to the spiritual in the universe is how he once described his task. In other words, the human being is, potentially, as the ancients taught, a microcosm of the macrocosm. Steiner was no longer silent, no longer alone, but he paid the price. He had stuck his head above the parapet and was shot at from many directions. In the 10 or so years to come, until his premature death in 1925 at the age of 64, there were indeed triumphs, but also tragedies. Yet despite exhaustion and illness, Steiner continued in his efforts to remind us of our evolutionary potential and that we are not alone in the universe. Indeed, that we are made in the image and likeness of God. Some listened, some not. Herein lay the challenge, both for him and now for us.